Welcome. My name is Lisa Yee Litzenberg, and I work in Career Service Office of the School of Natural Resources and Environment. This panel, the Global Environmental Careers Panel, is part of a larger International Career Pathways series of events. I hope some of you have been able to take advantage of some of those panels. I want to thank Bill Nolting in the back with the International Center. He's been very instrumental in helping organize some of the panels and also in securing funding to help our speakers come in, so we're very thankful for that. The format for today, we'll just have about an hour for the panelists. We'll ask some questions to get some of their best advice on global environmental careers. At the end, we will have half an hour where you guys can interact on a more informal level personally with the panelists. You can come on down after that from 3:30 to 4. Wanted to give a plug for anyone. We have a few slots open. We're doing special pizza with individual panelists with Rakhi and Charlotte. We have a few slots open for Rakhi, so if anyone's interested, please come see me right after the panel and we can get you in for that. Let's see. There's some information here. You can get handouts later. Be sure to grab those. There's a lot of good information on the program. We also have evaluation, program evaluations. Maybe I'll make sure that Marika can pass those out to here. So without further ado, let me help introduce the panelists. First we have Charlotte Mack to my left, and she's with the ICF International. She's one of our alums. She's a dual alum between the School of Natural Resources and the Ford School of Public Policy, so she has both MS and MPP. She's an associate with ICF International's Climate Change and Sustainability Group out of the Washington, D.C. office. She has over 6 years of experience working in the climate change field. Current clients at the ICF International include clients such as the U.S. Agency for International Development, the World Bank, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, National Park Service, among others. So that's Charlotte. And then to her left, we have Rakhi Kasat. She is also an alum of the School of Natural Resources and Environment with a Master of Science degree. She works for the U.S. EPA International Programs Office, the Office of International and Tribal Affairs, also out of D.C. In her current position, she manages and coordinates environmental programs and partnerships in Southeast Asia. She also completed, interestingly, recently a 6-month temporary assignment at the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues at the U.S. Department of State. And then finally, we have one of our current dual degree students. We have Mary Fritz, who is a current Herb Institute student, so she's doing a dual MS and MBA degree here in her 3rd year. She's going to talk to you a little bit about her summer fellowship that she did at Wello, a social venture based in Mumbai, India, focused on bringing clean water to families in developing countries. So some excellent initiatives. Let's welcome our panelists. So first off, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to go in turn and kind of describe a little bit about your background, your education, and coming to the current work that you do.
So I guess I'll start. Can you guys, is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. So I graduated from the University of Delaware with an environmental science degree, and then started working on community development issues. And when I was working, I was in AmeriCorps Vista, so I worked for the city of Winooski in Vermont, and also a bunch of NGOs to develop a community center and work on greening the community. And from that, I really decided that I needed to tie my environment interest to people. And so I came to Michigan and did a dual in policy and natural resources and focused on adaptation to climate change and really the intersection between international development and adaptation. So that led me to working at ICF in their impacts and adaptation group. So a lot of the work that I do is really focused on impacts and adaptation, and I do a little bit of mitigation work on the inventory, but mostly it's focused on thinking about how communities and countries can help develop more sustainably, and using different mechanisms under the UNFCCC and different EPA, USAID, World Bank initiatives to really develop those.
Hi everyone, as Lisa mentioned, my name is Rakhi Kasat. I work at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and I've been at EPA for about 5 years now. I did my undergraduate at Washington University in cultural anthropology and environmental studies, and then really wanted to hone in on the sciences. So came to University of Michigan to SNRE to get a degree in water resource management and resource ecology and management. I started off at EPA's water office and did some work there on finance, and then came over to the climate change office for a short stint. So we've got kind of a climate connection here to look at vulnerable populations and climate change, and then finally landed in the international office, which is where I am now. What I do day to day is I manage our partnerships and programs with Southeast Asia. That can mean everything from doing on-the-ground work on mercury mining in Indonesia, doing work globally on issues that are of interest to multiple countries in the region, trying to advance our partnerships from the U.S. and some of the countries in that region. So it's a mix, and I'm happy to talk more about that. Really enjoy what I do and look forward to your questions.
Hi everybody. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm in my 3rd year of a dual degree program between SNRE and the business school here at the university. Before coming back to school, I spent 5 years doing small business management in the Bay Area and in Chicago, and got really interested in the way that small businesses can impact their communities. So I decided that I wanted to sort of formalize that education and lean more towards social and environmental responsibility. Came back to the Urban Institute to do the dual degree. After my 1st year, I worked for Ford Motor Company in supply chain sustainability. And then at Ross last year, I did a Mack project with Acumen Fund, which really got me interested in more international development and sort of financing mechanisms for sustainable development. So last year, or this past summer, I did an internship in India with Wello, which is a social enterprise that came out of the university a couple years ago. Works on getting water to rural communities in India and hopefully beyond at some point. And I did that internship through WDI, the William Davidson Institute. So I'm happy to talk about the process of recruiting for that program. I think it's a really great program. They send about 25 or so students abroad every summer to a social enterprise or something similar to get that experience.
Okay. I'd like to ask next, all the students here are interested in either internationally focused careers or globally focused careers, so both working abroad or globally focused environmental work. So I'd like to hear from all of you a little bit more about a project or two that you've worked on that has a global reach. Talk to us about the skills that you're drawing on most. I'm sure this is an area students would have an interest in. What kinds of skills do you need to become a global environmental leader in the field? And what advice do you have to students on how they might gain some of these skills right now while they're at the University of Michigan?
So one of the projects that I work on is with USAID headquarters and their adaptation team called Climate Change Resilient Development. And we work with headquarters to support their missions in adaptation work. And that is probably my biggest project, and I think that has the largest global reach. So we work with missions, we work with people in developing countries to help them, I guess, in all different ways. So we create guidance for them, we pilot different projects for them, we help them with adaptation planning, we conduct workshops with them. So it's everything from the country level and regional level all the way down to a community scale. I wrote down the skills that I use because I think that this is something that I don't think about every day, but there are certain skills that I use in this project, and I think communication is one of them that's really important, both verbal and written communication. Also organizational skills and project management and time management, being able to understand what is more important, like what should you be focusing on. Being organized is really important when you're a contractor. I also think that equally as important is technical knowledge on the subject matter. We basically implement and do a lot of the technical work that the U.S. government wants to do themselves. So that's really important, and being innovative about the technical subject matter that you're working on. And then project management more generally, budget tracking, coordination, keeping in constant communication with people, that type of thing. And I also, another thing, it seems very cliche, but is just Microsoft programs, and the people that we use a lot are really good at manipulating Word and Excel and PowerPoint. They're really efficient at it, they're creative, they're really good at it. So that's a skill that I think is really important for probably almost any job.
One of the projects that I've been working on quite a bit is a partnership that EPA has with the Ministry of Environment, or Indonesia's version of EPA. And we had signed an agreement last year, and underneath that agreement we've identified several places where we wanted to do collaboration on activities like toxics or greenhouse gases, or even things like clean fuels. And so what we've done is we've sat down with them and talked about what are their interests, what are our interests, and how we can work jointly on these areas. So it's involved everything from doing conference calls to having experts from EPA go out to talk to them more about these issues, or having groups from Indonesia come to the US to study these issues more. So what I've been doing as part of all this is managing that work plan, ensuring that the goals that we've set out together are really working, and that we're really meeting the objectives of our partnership. So some of it can involve kind of that project management piece of it, making sure pieces are fitting, but also looking at being able to look at a lot of different technical issues and understand them very quickly, and being able to sort of manage and understand people's expectations, especially working across different cultures. So I would say I think that what she said was really good about communication and project support and things like that. I would also add not only being able to be an effective leader, but also being a good team player. So as much as you all are working on group projects, you know, trying to really hone those skills of being able, and this may sound cliche as well, but being a good listener, being able to really understand the needs of the others in the group, and also being able to adapt. I think doing work internationally just involves a lot of flexibility, and being able to adapt to the circumstances, because they will change really often and often unexpectedly, and just being able to kind of roll with that.
So my main project over the summer was a market entry strategy for Wello's product, which is basically a barrel on a handle that you can push like a baby stroller, so that you can fill that with water and roll it rather than carrying water on your head, etc. So it saves people time and reduces the physical burden of that water transportation. So a lot of what I had to look at was what we expected the social impact of this product to be versus what it actually might turn out to be, and what were those implications for the business. So I think one of the skills that I've learned here at SNRE that really helps me with that was systems thinking. I took systems thinking with Tom Gladwin, and we've gotten some systems thinking in the SNRE Master's Core and everything. And I think it's really important to be able to sort of pull back and look at issues from a higher level and think about how they're all interconnected. And if you're pulling one lever, what might that be doing to different areas that you need to keep under consideration. Adaptability is definitely a great one. And I think my other piece of advice is being able to sort of mix idealism with realism. And you know, like have that high goal of I want to change the world, but be able to underneath that say, like, how am I going to do that on the day-to-day, and is it realistic to be pursuing whatever I'm pursuing? Is that making a difference? And constantly evaluating that.
Really like to get a sense of the variety of the kinds of work that you do. I know a lot of the students here are very interested to see the different types of careers that are out there. Can you talk to us about what does a typical week on the job look like? What kinds of activities are you doing? And for you, Mary, maybe talk a little bit more about the kinds of things you did in your fellowship over the summer. What kinds of activities are you doing, and what do you enjoy most about the work that you're doing, and what do you enjoy least?
So I think that adaptability and flexibility are important here, because my weeks never look the same. I think some weeks I'm in my office really writing a report or doing research and coming up with products. Other weeks I'm in the field working with partners, conducting workshops, spend a lot of time in meetings, collaborating, talking about what are our next tasks that we're going to undertake. Also a lot of time doing project management. So it's really a variety of different activities. the thing that I like doing the most is probably working on the technical issues, sitting down, talking about what are we going to do, what is important, how are we going to do it, what is the best way to do it, and being innovative, working collaboratively with the different partners that I work with. I also think working with my clients and working with their partners is really fulfilling and exciting, to be on the ground doing workshops and doing pilots and stuff like that. The part that I probably like doing or least enjoy is administrative stuff. So when you're a contractor, you have to do a lot of reporting and budget tracking to justify how you're spending your money. And so a portion of my work is doing that, and it can get a little monotonous at times. But yeah, that's probably it.
I guess I would probably say the same thing, that my weeks never really look the same. I do a lot of project support and project management. I manage grants and contracts and agreements with other agencies like USAID. So a good amount of my time tends to go there. Also organizing visits, whether it's visits from our partner countries to the US, or organizing when we're actually going to be out in country and helping make sure that we're making good use of our time. So that is some of it, but it can also be sitting in on interagency meetings at State Department or USAID, trying to move initiatives forward and talk about what EPA can bring to the table, parts of negotiations or technical meetings. It really varies, and it varies from time of year also, just depending on the other countries and what holidays they have and things like that. So I guess that would be sort of the suite of things that I do. In terms of what I enjoy the most, it really is working with the people in the country. It's really great to just sort of see kind of those aha moments when you are really starting to understand each other and come across cultures and really work towards a common goal, or to hear that a project that you started a few years ago has really started to make an impact. That's really fulfilling. I like the training aspect of it. I really enjoy going out and doing trainings, but also working with partners to kind of put on trainings collaboratively. And I think probably mostly the administrative pieces. The government, as you all probably suspect, has lots of bureaucracy, some paperwork, and just kind of having to navigate your way can take a little time and a lot of patience, but in the end it's worth it.
So same thing, my weeks were never the same. I had some days where I would get in a Jeep in the morning and ride out 2 hours into the desert and spend the day talking to people in a village and teaching them about the product and asking them for their feedback. And then I also had days where I was like sitting in an apartment buried in Excel, like working on finance. Kind of ran the gamut. Where I was very entrepreneurial. It's a pretty early stage startup, and therefore I was working on a little bit of everything every day, which is the kind of atmosphere that I totally love, so that worked really well for me. I guess it could be frustrating at times because I was always interrupting myself, I think, was my biggest problem. Was like I would get started on a project and then all of a sudden the needs of the day would change and I would have to stop what I was doing. And so the couple of things that I was overall working on over the summer that I was, were my deliverables at the end that I was supposed to turn in for my internship would always get pushed off for whatever had to be done that day. So the last couple of weeks were a scramble, but yeah, it was a great experience overall, I think. Loved it.
So I know a lot of students here are in the throes of starting to think about their job searches or internship searches. So I'd like to hear from each of you, how did you get your job or internship? And can you give any advice to students? How do you make yourself stand out as a candidate? What advice do you have for students in going after a job?
Thanks, Ed.
Already. So I can talk about the recruiting process for WDI. I think there's two different ways you can get a fellowship through WDI. They have some that are initiated through the Institute, and then you can also source your own internship. So I think in about January every year, they'll release the list of companies that are recruiting that year, and then you go through, a cover letter and resume and interview process through WDI, and then with the individual company that you might be working for, and you rank 2 or 3 companies that are your top choices, and then they match you. And then also you can source your own internship. So if you find a company that fits their sort of interests and criteria that you're really interested in working for, you can bring that to WDI and fill out some forms and paperwork and stuff, and they can help you out with funding, which is really great. It's I have a couple of friends that did that way, and also were able to pull in funding from a few different areas to support like being in India with an impact investing fund or something over the summer. So there are definitely really great experiences out there. If you're interested in something like that, definitely keep an eye out, and I'm happy to talk more about recruiting for it.
I think right now, honestly, getting hired in the federal government is pretty tough just because of the budget situation. So that is going to present some real challenges, and I wanted to be pretty honest about that. I think some of the things that you can do if you really do want to work in the government is to try to find an internship or a fellowship to start with. That gets your foot in the door and gets people to know your work and love what you do and the person that you are, and kind of opens some doors and starts helping you network within the organization. I actually started at EPA doing a fellowship program, and it did really help because I think that I was starting to make networks. I better understood the system, and for people I was sort of a known entity when it came time to being hired on as a federal employee. And then even when I went to a job fair at EPA, I could have that previous experience on my resume so people could see that I had worked with the agency. So I think, you know, finding ways to get your foot in the door, whether it's a short-term internship or whether it's some sort of a fellowship that's more long-term, I think is a good strategy. With USAID or with State Department, there is, if you're interested in doing foreign service where you kind of have these 3-year assignments, there's a whole other track that I can talk to you all about that involves certain testing requirements and things like that, so you would want to just start that fairly early. Coming straight out of school, the PMF program, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is another really good opportunity. There's lots of PMFs that have been in my office that are really bright and really hardworking and had a good experience. So those are just a few things, and I'm happy to talk about more if any of those sound interesting.
I got my job at ICF through Michigan. It was at the Ford School. They were collaborating and doing, it was a PowerPoint presentation about ICF and their internship program and a little bit about their careers program. So I reached out to the career services woman there, and I kind of knew that there was a handful of firms that I wanted to look at that do adaptation work, so it was very focused, and so that was it was just a really good opportunity for me to meet with them and kind of get the hook and give them my interest, show them what I've done. I know that SNRE collaborates with ICF. We have a recruiter who's actually in Ann Arbor, and I know that she's going to be coming around probably around January to start talking about different positions that are opening up. So there's an opportunity there. I think experience is huge. So the more that you can have experience doing international work on the ground is really, really helpful. Networking is, again, as cliche as it sounds, really important to meet people, find out what they're doing, have them remember you, and being able to talk about those experiences with other people during interviews, I think, is important. Being passionate about the work that you do. I mean, if I was hiring people when I'm interviewing people, I really want them to be passionate about doing international work, because it's not easy to get a job doing it, to be honest with you. I think that a lot of people have to compromise and do a lot more project management work at the start to get into the technical stuff internationally, so passion is really important. And just being articulate and able to talk about your interests, I think, is also really important. And along with that is talking about cultural trade-offs. So how you interact with people in different countries compared to the U.S., being savvy about that and showing that through conversations, I think, is really helpful too.
It's a nice kind of transition. I was going to ask about kind of for students interested in working internationally or in globally focused careers, what advice do you have for them to better position themselves now?
Yes, experience. And I guess now that I'm thinking about it, a few language is really awesome. I think it's a really good way to get in is if you have that language expertise. And while my job isn't really regionally focused, but I think that if you have a specific region that you're knowledgeable in, it's helpful to get your foot in the door for international work and just to kickstart you in that right direction. Knowing what's going on in the international community, so there's Climate L is really helpful if you're interested in climate change. But keeping up with different negotiations, who are the NGOs, who are the different players, I think that's also really helpful. Again, just being articulate and smart about what you're talking about is a good strategy.
I'd agree with that, and I'd say, I guess in the government, I've seen people really do it in 3 different ways. One, at least at EPA especially, people have become a technical expert in whatever field that they're interested in, and become such an expert that people are starting to ask for their expertise internationally. So for example, we have a woman who is amazing with environmental impact assessments and knows everything about that, all the ins and outs. And she's been doing it now for 15 or 20 years, and at this point she's in demand all over the world for that. She had started working on it domestically, and now she's in demand in so many different countries, South America and Southeast Asia, and a lot of different other places. So that's one way, and similarly we have folks that are across the EPA that didn't start out, they started out doing domestic work, but because they've reached the depth of their knowledge that people have now asked for that expertise in other places. So that's one way. So I'd say if there's a subject that you're really passionate about, to really just study it intensely and to understand it intensely and start to look for those opportunities down the road. I think there's people who are focused on the international piece first, that have done degrees specifically focused on international policy, or degrees focused on, working towards a foreign service or particular international negotiations and things like that. So I think that's another route that people have taken, where they don't take a particular technical area, but they take kind of a broader international focus, and I think that's also been effective for people. And the third route, I think, this was probably most similar to what I did, is I knew at some point that I wanted to get international experience. So as I was going about my career and it started at EPA, I kind of kept an eye out for those opportunities to do that. And then when the right opportunity came along, I did my best to take advantage of it. So I think, if you know that that's something that you want to have experience in, and you may somewhere down the road just kind of keep an open eye for where those opportunities come up. So it may be that most of the work that you're doing in your organization is domestic, but that you have one project that's international, or you try to look for those one opportunities or pocket of opportunities. You may not have a job where it's possible to be 100% international, but you may have jobs where there's opportunities to do something that kind of reaches across a border.
So I'll probably be better at answering this question once I actually have a job, but I think I would just echo the experience thing. I think something I've noticed in a lot of international work and in social enterprise in particular, street cred goes a long way. So you can tell someone you're passionate about something, but if you haven't done something to show that that's actually true, then people tend not to necessarily. People respond better if you can prove it. So.
I'd like to also add to those comments. I completely agree from career services perspective. Seeing a lot of our students go through and get jobs internationally, what seems to make them really credible are those hands-on experiences. So internships are huge. I know the International Institute has funding for internationally focused internships, and Bill might know more about this, but I think it's at least $5,000 that you can apply for if you would like to do an internship abroad. So consider that. There are funding sources to create your own internship opportunity. I would also say, like here at SNRE, a lot of our students will do interdisciplinary team research projects, but I know for those of you outside of SNRE, you probably have a lot of opportunities to work on team projects through classes or things like that. So consider if there's an opportunity for you to work abroad. We've had a lot of students do some internationally focused projects, and that have really given them the street cred. So that is another opportunity. Look for your research projects and any other academic project work that could help you gain that hands-on experience.
I think along with street cred, it's like some people don't know if they're actually going to like it until they actually do it. So it's important for your own process as well.
I was just going to say that I did my master's project from SNRE in Nepal, so that was really good for me to have that experience there. And then also through the Ford School, there's international economic development programs that they put on every year. And that's another helpful way to be able to get into a country and talk to people, understand it. And even just in your classes, like Lisa said, focusing on a specific region or specific countries, like do the international side of things, be able to learn more about a country or a region so you can use that knowledge in your interviews and things like that. Going abroad is the best way to do it, but even just gaining knowledge here, doing projects on it is also helpful.
What about specific coursework? Do you have any recommendations? Certainly language skills you've already mentioned, but are there particular courses in general that you might recommend?
So there's a language program, I think through the International Institute too, where you can get funding for the semester, or maybe it's a year, and I think you have to take 3 classes. It's very competitive, but it's a way to get people to start practicing languages that aren't practiced that much. I think like Quechua is there, and Hindi, and a bunch of really interesting courses. So that's a really great way to do it because you get paid to do it too. The Ford School has some really good classes. International, just their international policy class is really great. It's a fantastic class. IEDP. Here I took international environmental law. That was really good too. And I don't know if they still have it, but there was a seminar with Maria Carmen Lemos that was about adaptation. That was internationally focused. So any classes with her and Arun and Rosina also, they're really great resources for that. And again, the Ford School, their policy, international policy classes are fantastic as well.
Just want to break into for Ford School, I don't know how many of you are aware, if any of you have an interest in working for the State Department, there is a diplomat in residence at the Ford School that anyone can take advantage of. So if you have an interest in taking the Foreign Service exam and working for the State Department, that diplomat in residence is available to help you prepare for the Foreign Service exam. So that is something you might want to take advantage of. I understand that's very competitive. It can take a year to get ready for that. So that's something very interesting.
It's been a little while for me, but I guess I would say the environmental justice courses here are actually very good, and that may come as a little bit of a surprise, but looking at vulnerable communities in other countries, it really helps to have a foundation of what environmental justice means in this country, and I think that people have valued that skill, in different interactions that I've had, different partners that we've worked with. I would say I was on a science track, and I think that's been helpful to be able to understand some of the science behind some of the work that I'm doing now. But it was good that I also balanced that with a policy course, and I would say likewise to policy students to try to balance with the science course, because it really helps to be able to show that you've got that balance, and even if you choose a particular track, it helps to show that you can also work on other types of issues or look at things from a different lens. So that's a great process.
At SNRE, the only components that I would add, I already talked about systems thinking. Ming Shu's class, Sustainable Systems in Developing Countries, is really good. At Ross, there are a few classes. Ross has been one of the leading sort of thinking communities in bottom of the pyramid enterprise, and so there's the BOP class with Ted London. There's a social enterprise with Michael Gordon class, and a few other ones that you can look into there. And I think a lot of them are class listed with a bunch of different schools across campus. So.
Well, that's it in terms of the formal questions that we wanted to ask. We really want to save a chunk of time for all of you. If you have individual questions that you'd like to ask, we'd love to hear them. And we'll be happy to answer questions. Yes? If you can say your name maybe and what program you're with, that would be nice.
My name is Lisa, and I'm with SNRE, the Conservation College track. And I had a question for Rakhi and Charlotte. And I was just interested, being part of U.S. government agencies, if you have run up against any obstacles just through working with kind of political organizations, and the bureaucracy that's involved, and how you deal with that. Does that make sense? That question.
Could you say a little bit more about what you mean by political organizations?
Or just working with these kind of big organizations under the U.S. government, like the kind of bureaucracy, the obstacles that you run up against. I've just heard stories and.
That's a great question, and it wasn't something that I was really aware of before I started looking at EPA, what kind of a factor that would be, so I'm really glad that you asked it. I think with every, with every political administration you have in place, some of the priorities, of course, the core mission and vision of your organization will stay the same, but some of the priorities will change and shift, and you have to be ready to adapt to that. So EPA under different administrations has looked very different, and we've had different types of initiatives go through and different types of legislation and different capabilities, frankly. So it is something that's a reality in an organization. So people who have been there for a while have grown accustomed to being able to adapt to that. So learning the core of your of what you do, and how to make that work underneath different types of priorities. And so that it can be a challenge depending on, you know, the political leadership that you have, the types of priorities and initiatives that are moving forward, but you just kind of learn again to be adaptable and to be flexible and to show the value of the work. And so one of the things that we've found to be really effective is to always be very results driven. So always be able to show what your program is bringing to the table and why it's being results and how you've been able to leverage other partners. So it can be a challenge, but it can also be a really good opportunity to really push you to focus on the results of your program.
I think being a contractor is a little different because we don't have to deal with that stuff in our day-to-day work, but we do always have to, well, in some of my projects, I take the hat of USAID, and other projects it's the World Bank, and other projects it's CPA, so you have to be able to balance that, and honestly, the organizations make most of those decisions, but it's strange when you're working on larger projects like my USAID project, because it's almost like a project independently of USAID, so we work with different partners in different countries, and we have to vet them and make sure that they and the results of our projects are in line with what the federal government's views are. So that's one challenge. Working with anything like websites and stuff like that, that's also a challenge in the federal government. So making sure that your clients really just understand what you're doing and that you have their hat on all the time is helpful.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, it leads me to another question, unless somebody else does. Do you have trouble at all, like implementing these programs that you kind of are designed by people, you know, in DC, or, you know, designed by people who aren't local to the communities where they've been implemented? Do you make efforts, and is there support in actually going to these communities and working, talking with the locals to kind of have that local knowledge base when you're designing the program to begin with?
Yeah, that's actually a question that we get quite a bit, is how does EPA decide which country we're going to work in or decide what projects we're going to do? And our answer is always that we don't dictate that. We never go into a country and say, we think you really need to work on your solid waste problem. We really think, you know, that you guys could be doing a lot more about toxics or about your water pollution. All of our work internationally is really driven by the requests from those host countries. So a country will come to us and say something like, you know, we're really thinking about how we could reshape our water laws. You know, we know that you guys went through this process. What are the experiences that you had? Or, you know, we're trying to think of a particular method to deal with our Superfund-like sites. So how have you guys done that? You know, can we learn lessons? Or, you know, it seems like we both have a problem with water scarcity. Is there a way that we could share the lessons that we're both learning along the way? So I think international development, sort of my limited perspective, has taken kind of a trajectory where it used to be very driven top-down, that we think you need to work on this and this is what you should do. And people have really come to value things like really have it driven from the communities, and then also do things where you're building capacity in the community so that after you leave, it's still there. So doing things like joint trainings where EPA has often done a train-the-trainer approach. We work with ICF quite a bit on this before, we have in the past, where we'll go out and we'll first train trainers in the local community, and they can go out and do the training and bring the local context to it and give that out to their own communities. And again, that's a way that we want these projects to be sustainable, so even after we leave, the project is still being implemented and being effective. EPA, our work internationally tends to be, you know, we'll kickstart this and provide a model, but we really want that to be taken hold of by the host community or the host country. So yes, I think people often have that impression, that there have been international projects that have unfortunately gone in the road of where it has been dictated from a place that was very far removed from the realities. But I think people have really started to understand the importance of bringing in institutional knowledge. So I'm really glad you asked that question.
I would say my experience is similar. Both with USAID and the World Bank, they create country development strategies, and they sit down with their counterparts and really develop it in conjunction with each other. So it's taking into account what the country wants as much as what these organizations can provide for them. And in terms of a program and actually implementing it in countries, I would say that USAID in particular is always engaging local counterparts and local organizations, their local missions, in developing and designing the programs. And I think that as each program gets implemented, we learn more and more about it, so it actually creates a better program the next time. And just being adaptable to country dynamics is important. and I guess the other thing I'll add is that for my projects, we work really closely with the client, and the client is with us. USAID is with us when we're actually implementing the project. So they are there, they're seeing it, they're hearing it. They're really good about processing it and thinking about how it impacts other projects that they're working on and translating that.
Any other group questions? Otherwise, I'm sorry. Lindsay? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Master. My question is from Charlotte. Related to climate change, what specific skills do you think is very much valuable in the industry that, like for the job market with this?
I think that technical knowledge is really important. And I mean, so a lot of the stuff that I've learned on the job, but most of it I actually learned in graduate school. And just more subjects than others, I think it's part of an intellectual community, and it still is, specifically adaptation, because it's still evolving and shaping. And so right now it's really interesting to be a part of how that area is shaping and what that space is going to look like in 10 years. So I think that the technical knowledge is hugely important, and just understanding the changes that have occurred from one COP to the next, and what is actually occurring down on the ground. So, for example, the NAPAs that were produced by countries, and just understanding the background for them and why they've decided to create NAPs instead of NAPAs. You know, just understanding what the costs and benefits are and what the advantages and disadvantages of different programs are.
So this is for anyone, I guess. So you spoke about passion being, you know, definitely important in getting a job. But what would you say is the balance that you found between sort of being flexible when you're looking for positions or when you're looking for career development opportunities versus sort of having like something, you know, being grounded in something that you want to come back to as like sort of, yeah, your core passion or thing that you're interested in?
I think that it's a personal decision mainly, but I do think that it's important to be able to compromise a little bit. So when I first started at ICF, I was doing all domestic work, but I was doing adaptation work, so it built my technical capacity while I wasn't in the international space. So being patient for that first year really paid off for me, because now I'm the main person in my group working on international issues. So being patient and letting your managers know what you're interested in and continue to express that is really helpful, because they're caught up in a lot of things, and while you say it once, it may not stick. So, and I think that once you're at a job, proving that you do a really good job and that you're good at your job is the best way to take the direction that you want to go in. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay. I agree with that, with what Charlotte said. I think sometimes people have sort of really high expectations for their first job out of college. I know that I did, and I think it's not that you shouldn't have those expectations, but there is going to be a period of where you have to have some patience and prove yourself. And one of the biggest ways to quickly turn off an employer or a team is to come, you know, with all these expectations without having really proved yourself or proved that you're really dedicated to the team. So being a good team player first, putting the team first, and being humble about what it is that you're capable of and the skills that you bring to the table. I think you should, of course, be confident, but I think also, you know, not expecting to reach for the stars first, and being able to take a little bit of time to prove yourself, and looking for opportunities to really help other people out. So one of the things I did when I started in my current job is I just looked for every opportunity I could find to help someone else with something that they were doing. And so much of that is about building relationships, and that's how you really get work done in big organizations, is finding people, helping them as much as you can, and then, you know, you find that they're also willing to help you out, and your work is twice as effective that way. So I think that was something that I learned kind of early on, and I would suggest for anybody. I think that, you know, keeping those end goals in mind, and like Charlotte was saying, to, you know, plant that seed with your managers as early and often as you can, just, you know, so they can see that you're doing a great job with your current work, but there may be something else that you want to be doing, or another project that you want to expand to, and they're usually pretty open to that if they feel like you're invested in the organization and in the team.
So I was actually having a really similar conversation with one of my friends the other day about how when you're in school, everyone's always encouraging you to like reach for the stars and shoot for your dreams, and nobody really talks about the sort of realistic part of that, almost going back to what I was saying before about work, but like you know, there's a part where you have to pay your bills and you have to pay your loans and you have to, you know, make a living and live where you want to be and stuff like that. So there's definitely a balance that needs to be struck, which is not to say that I don't think that all of us should follow our passions and try to do something that we really care about. But you know, like, you have to sort out your own priorities for yourself, and those are going to be different for everyone in this room, I think.
I was curious, are there some undergraduate students in the audience, you folks too? I know we're featuring a lot of the panelists here that have graduate level educations, but I thought it might be good to ask, are there opportunities in the fields working globally for students with undergraduate education? I don't want, you know, undergraduates to go away thinking, oh, I have to have a graduate degree to get there. And if you could speak to that a little bit, and then we'll take any questions.
So again, I think that it's about passion. If you have a manager and you keep telling them that you're interested in something and you're working hard, it's going to pay off. I can promise you that. So, and mostly you'll start off and you'll learn a lot of new skills after undergraduate. I remember what I learned my first year. I was like a whole new person after 1 year of working the working world. So be excited for that, just learning work skills in general, and even after graduate school too. But patience is important and just working hard. I can't think of specific opportunities that are internationally focused, but internships right after undergraduate school, well, you might not get paid for them, but just getting that experience, maybe going out for a summer or 6 months volunteering for an NGO, working on the ground on a project is really helpful too.
What about, I know a little bit more about ICF, for undergrad students right out of undergraduate programs, I think it's the research assistant position. Would that be a good way to get a foot in the door and then eventually get on to?
Exactly. So if you enter as a research assistant, you'd be supporting a whole slew of managers, and by you might work on international projects, you might not be able to go out to the field, but over time you'll be able to develop those skills and you'll prove yourself and you'll be able to go out. So there's definitely opportunities to work at ICF in our group as an undergraduate, just not necessarily going straight into an international track.
I guess at EPA there's also opportunities for undergraduates, and they're all on the website, and I can talk more about this at some point. Generally, I think some of the things that Charlotte was saying, making good use of your summers, getting just general, any kind of job experience shows people that you can be committed and dedicated to a job, that you can work in that kind of, be effective in a workplace setting. I think that's really good. And I just actually wanted to make a note about the whole passion question, because I don't know if you all had read this article that came out recently about passion, and sort of, I think the person, I forget who the author of it was basically saying that people get so worried about finding their passion and finding their dream and finding their passion that you can end up in an endless sort of self-journey kind of quest, you know. But they were saying that often what happens is you get really deep into a particular topic or try something out, and that's how you develop your passion over time. So it's not that you need to go job hunting until you find this be-all, end-all passion, but that over time, as you get more experience and as you have different types of experiences, you slowly, that kind of unfolds. And so not stressing yourself out too much about, am I doing the thing that's absolutely right for me, but having that sort of unfold over time. And I found that perspective really interesting, because it's very different from what we typically hear about, you know, following our dreams and those kinds of things. So I just wanted to share that as well. For undergrads also, I would say one thing that I wish I had done more of when I was an undergrad is trying to find good mentors early on. So I have a really pretty good network of mentors of people in my workplace and in other places that I really admire the work that they do. And just checking in with them every now and then to get their advice, and to also have them suggest books to read and things like that. I think that that can be really useful. So even if you have one or two as a college student, I think that that can be really helpful to get you on the path. So.
We have maybe one more question, and then we'll go into like a more informal session where you can come up and chat with folks one-on-one. Does anyone have a go ahead?
In your experience, is there a lot of occurrence where you have to make a compromise between kind of your environmental goal and the kind of the corporate interest or political agenda, that kind of thing? Is there a lot of this compromise happening, and how do you deal with it?
So do you mean, is there a lot of times where you have to compromise between maybe an environmental goal that you have and then the political agenda in a particular place?
Yeah, or maybe it's kind of harmful to your corporate interest and they kind of have some pressure on you or something like that.
Yeah. Well, EP is an interesting place for that, and I suspect a lot of other places, because we really are in between, you know, and business interests, NGOs, local communities, academics. You know, we work with all these stakeholders really regularly in the state and local governments. I think we're constantly trying to work sort of that balance out if there's competing priorities in any place that you go to. So, you know, what people use, for example, a particular watershed for may be very different depending on who's the stakeholder. So we're constantly having to negotiate that, and I think that that's going to be with any environmental goal, because everybody's going to come at it from a different perspective and a different kind of goal. And so just being able to negotiate that is actually a really strong skill that you'd want to develop if you're in this realm, because anytime, even if you're in a community doing a particular project on hygiene, or you're doing a project on, you know, cleaner fuels, you're going to have to look at all the different interests, understand those better, and then try to resolve those conflicts. So yes, we do run into it all the time, and I think each case can be a little bit different, but some of the skill sets that you can use of trying to understand different perspectives will be universal.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about the skill set. And for my job, I don't feel like I have to make compromises, but I also think that I've taken the stance where it's important to look at competing interests and to come up with a joint solution. So I don't know if Steve Yaffe still teaches the negotiation class, but that's a really, really good class to take. It changes your perspective on things a lot, because you have to understand where other people are coming from. And a tool that we use in that is to put everyone in the same room and talk about it and come up with a solution together, as opposed to hearing interests from different people and trying to come up with a solution. Having them come up with it themselves is a really powerful way of solving.